Tonight, it's based on Genesis chapter 22. So you can somewhat follow along in Genesis chapter 22. And it's titled, I don't often give you the title, and I'm going to try to start doing that. But it's entitled The Crushing Defeat. Oh, no, it's not. It's entitled, that's why I don't give you the title. Oh, man, this is a bad start already. Can you pray again? It's entitled A Crushing Victory. Sorry, A Crushing Victory. Totally different, right? Yeah. I had at first called it A Crushing Defeat, and I thought, no, that's wrong. It's A Crushing Victory. I have lived a wonderful life. I mean, the things that happened to me, the things I've seen, the places I've gone, I could tell you story after story after story for at least the rest of the night and all day tomorrow. I mean, I could tell you the story about how I got married to a beautiful woman named Rebecca, and how God planned that for me, how He put that all together for me. I could tell you the story of the birth of our twins, Esau and Jacob. I could tell you stories of Esau and Jacob growing up together and the things they used to do together. I could tell you the story of Esau so famished after coming in from hunting that he gave up his birthright to his younger son, Jacob. I could tell you the story of Jacob and how he deceived me. And he pretended he was Esau, and so I gave him the firstborn blessing. I could tell you the story of how Rebecca was behind all of that, and how angry Esau was, and how Esau wanted to kill his brother Jacob. I could tell you stories of good things. I could tell you stories of bad things. I could tell you stories of joy that would make you laugh. I could tell you stories of sorrow that would make you cry. I could tell you stories that made me confused about who God was. I could tell you stories that made me wonder, who is this God? I could tell you stories that made me sometimes angry about this God. I could tell you stories that made me, what's the word? Maybe settled with God. Not settled in a bad way, but settled that in my heart that I knew who God was. And I knew who I was before God. Of course, my father Abraham told me stories all the time. From my very first memories of listening to my father Abraham, it was all about Jehovah. It was all about God. He would tell me stories of his life about God. He would tell me the wonderful stories of how he came to the land of Canaan. He would tell me story after story. And of course, he would tell me the story of my miraculous birth. Not a week went by when he didn't tell me about the miraculous birth. Oh, we would have people that came and visited. And when they would visit, my mom and dad would sit them down at the table and they would say, "Let me tell you the story about our son Isaac." And they would tell the story about miraculous birth. I was their miracle child. They would tell the story of God's promise, how they couldn't have kids at all. And God promised that He would make a nation out of Abraham, that he would have descendants like the stars. And he would tell you how for 10 years they waited and nothing happened. How they doubted God, how they wondered about God, how they were confused about God. How was this ever going to happen? I mean, my dad was 100 years old and my mom was 90 years old when I was born. Is that not a miracle? I mean, that just does not happen. She was 90 years old, 90. I know, that's what everybody says. That's it. And they would eat cheese and crackers. This is just like it. And they would tell the stories of laughter in the household when I was born. And they would tell story after story. And my dad would tell me how God had promised his descendants would be like the stars. Just can't even count them. And he would tell me, "Isaac, you have that promise too, that your descendants will be like the stars." That was kind of my dad's thing, the stars. He would always go out at night and wonder and stare at the stars. And he would talk to God. My dad was maybe an unusual man, really. He was a great man. He was an amazing man. As I watched people interact with him and respect him and do business with him, I realized that my dad was significant. My dad was powerful. My dad was wealthy. My dad was just like I said, he was kind of unusual because my dad would tell me all the time how he talked to God and how I could talk to God and how God wanted a relationship with me and how my dad was God's friend. Did you know that God called Abraham, my father, his friend? He spent a lot of time with God under those stars. That was his thing. And from the very beginning, my dad Abraham taught me about God and taught me who he was and taught me to have a relationship with him. But even though I always knew who God was, I didn't really know who God was. I saw my dad interact with God, and I saw my dad talk to God, and I heard my dad all the stories, so I knew God, but I didn't really know God. Well, until that one day. It was a day when my dad said, "Hey, we're going to go on a journey." I loved going on journeys with my dad. We would go all over the land of Canaan. In fact, wherever we went, my dad said, "You're going to inherit this. Yep, that's yours too. What about that, Dad? Yep, that's yours too. Am I going to get that stream? That one's yours too. God's going to give it all to you." I loved going on journeys with my dad, and we would go almost every week. We would go somewhere. And so he said, "We're going on a journey." And I said, "Cool, let's go." And so 2 of the servants packed everything up, and me, my dad, and 2 servants, we started off on a journey. My dad saddled the donkey. We walked, he rode the donkey. Well, he was over 100 years old after all. So he saddled the donkey and he rode, and the servants put all the wood and our tent and all of our supplies on another donkey, and off we went. And we went on this journey. And we're walking the first day, and I said, "Dad, where are we going?" And he said, "Oh, we're going to the region of Moriah." Well, where in Moriah? Moriah was near Jerusalem, by the way. In fact, Moriah ended up being part of Jerusalem. Mount Moriah was where Solomon built the original temple of God. And I said, where are we going exactly? And he said, "Well, I don't really know." Now, that wasn't unusual for my dad. Because a lot of times my dad really didn't know. He just said, "You know what? God said we're going to go there, and so we're going to go. And he'll show us what we need to know." I mean, that's how we ended up living in the land of Canaan, after all. We were up in Syria and living in the land of Haran, named after my uncle. And God told my dad, "I want you to go to the land of Canaan." And Dad said, "Where?" And he said, "Just go, I'll show you." And we ended up here in Canaan. And we've done pretty well. And every time God had said, "Abraham, I want you to do something," Abraham said, "Okay, I'll do it." And Abraham told me, whenever God says do something, you better go do it. And Abraham, my father, just followed God. He was unusual that way. And so he said, "We're going to the land, to the region of Moriah." And, well, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to worship God there. Well, of course we're going to worship God there. Made sense. We do that all the time. That's why we had the wood for the offering and the sacrifice. And okay, so we're going to. And we walked, and I thought, well, wait a minute. We have wood. Dad has the hunting knife. We got fire. I wondered, don't we usually bring a lamb on this kind of journey when we're going to worship God? I was going to ask him about that, but he seemed pretty lost in his own thoughts. He kind of seemed, really didn't want to talk to anybody, so I didn't ask him about that day. Well, the second day, we got up and we journeyed again, and Moriah was about 3 days' journey from where we lived. And on the second day, we started off, and we really didn't say a whole lot on the second day either. Dad really, for whatever reason, wasn't really all that talkative. Dad usually told me story after story, but he was pretty silent. He was kind of lost in his own thoughts. I wondered, what was he thinking about? Must have been pretty serious for my dad to not be talking and telling me stories about God. So me and the servants, we just mostly talked, and that day went by, and we sat around the campfire, and after we had had our supper, Dad went off into the desert and under the stars. Well, of course, he was talking to God, because that's what he does. That's my dad's thing. Look up into the stars and talk to God. He spent a long, long night there. In fact, I don't think I even remember him coming back to sleep. Well, that morning, we got up, and it didn't take us long, maybe a couple hours, and Abraham said, we're going to go over there to Mount Moriah. And the servants were, okay, we'll do that. And he said, no, you two servants are going to stay here with the donkey. And my dad got off the donkey, and he took the wood that was on the other donkey, and he loaded that up in my arms. And he had the fire with him, the torch with him, and he had the hunting knife with him. And I said, well, where are we going? Well, we're going to Mount Moriah. Well, why? Well, we're going to make sacrifice to God. We're going to worship God. And we walked a little bit more in silence, and I thought, Dad, if we're going to make a burnt offering, where's the lamb? We normally have a lamb. Where's the lamb? Well, Dad didn't answer right away. He hesitated. And I sensed a bit of a quiver in his voice, maybe. And he said, son, God will provide that. Don't worry, God will provide that. Okay. He knew God. God always talked to him. Maybe that's what he was talking to God that night about. I don't know. But he was my dad, so we went on, and we climbed up the mountain. Well, it was more of a hill, really. We climbed up a steep hill, and I put the wood down, and we gathered rocks, and we made an altar. And we laid stone upon stone, and we made a pretty solid altar. And I helped Dad arrange the wood. And we had the wood all arranged, and it was ready to go. When we put fire to that thing, it would burn. And I looked around, and I thought, I wonder, did Dad have someone meeting him here? Where's the lamb? And Dad walked up to me and held on to me. And he said, son, and a rope in his hands. And he said, son, God told me to come here with you because, son, you're the lamb today. That doesn't make any sense. I'm your son. What are you talking about? And he said, no, you're the burnt offering today. I'm the burnt offering? I'm your son. I'm your only son. The only son that you and Sarah ever had or ever are going to have. I'm the son of the promise. I'm the son whom you told me all the time, you're going to inherit this land. Your descendants are going to be greater than the stars. I was the son. But he bound me up and he placed me on the altar. My dad, who at 100 years old had me, the son of the promise. I knew he loved me. I knew he loved me. So why was he doing this? How could this be? It didn't make any sense. And how could God say this? How could God do this? He made these promises, and now he's saying, I want you to kill your son. This didn't make sense. How could this happen? Who was this God, and why would you follow him? Why? Why would you obey him? Dad, don't do this. I looked up with Dad. He was crying. I was crying. He was sobbing. And I looked up into his eyes as he raised that knife. And I saw love. I saw hurt. I saw pain. I saw doubt. I saw maybe confusion. But I saw that he was going to do this. I saw that he didn't want to do this, but he was going to. Because God asked him to. And he'd always told me, if God asks you to do something, you do it, no matter what. And as he raised that knife, he was sobbing. And I said, no, Father, no, why have you forsaken me? And then we heard, Abraham, Abraham. I opened my eyes and I saw Dad looking around, and I looked around and we heard the voice again, Abraham. And it was the voice of the angel of the Lord. And the angel of the Lord said, Abraham, stop. I swear by myself, the Lord, he said, that because I know that you did not withhold your son from me, you're with your only son from me. I now know, Abraham, that you love me more than anything else. And Abraham, I will give you everything I promised. And Abraham, your descendants will be as numerous as the stars. And your son Isaac will live, and he will have descendants through you. This God that I doubted, this God that I told my dad don't do it, this God that I wouldn't want to follow myself, this God who I thought was bad saved me. This God, after all, created me. This God, after all, I was a miracle of God. And I learned that day. I learned that day that my father Abraham loved me more than anything else in this world except God. I knew that I was my father's treasure. I knew that my father's heart valued me above all else in this world and everybody else in this world. I knew that I was the apple of his eye. I knew that I was his world. I was his life. I was his heart. But I learned that he was willing to give his heart to God. And God was worth more to him than anything he had in his heart. I learned that if you give God everything that you value in your heart, if you give God the greatest treasure that you hold in your heart, he will give you his heart. He will give you his heart. That was the day that I learned God's heart. That was the day I knew who God was. And I saw God's heart for me. Because no matter what I treasure on earth, no matter what I treasure in my heart, no matter how much I value it, I've learned that God is more valuable. And following him is more valuable than following anything that I want in my heart. What do you value in your heart? What do you treasure above all else? What is it that you're afraid that God's going to ask from you? That's probably what you treasure the most in this world. That which you don't want to give God, that's probably where your heart is. What do you treasure? And are you willing to follow God and give him your heart? Are you willing to trust him with the most valued possession of your heart? Because when you do, he will give you his heart. Let me pray. God, we would all say that we want your heart. But really, God, we're fearful because we don't know what that means exactly and what you would ask of us. And God, we confess we hold things in our heart and we hold them tightly. And when you ask for them, we say, I don't know. Not sure that I want to go there. That hurts. And I know it's going to hurt, and I don't want it to. But God, I pray that you would soften our hearts. I pray that you would give us the courage and the strength and the trust to give you our heart. Because God, you're waiting to give us yours. You're waiting to give us your whole heart unreservedly, and whatever that might mean to us. God, lead us to a point where your heart and knowing your heart and having your heart means far more than our own. Lead us to that. I ask and pray in your name, Jesus. Amen.